welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my top 5 tips on how you can boost your milk supply. So my top tip number 1 is a really obvious one, and as a lactation consultant myself, I would always recommend that if you have any concerns whatsoever relating to how much milk your baby is getting, whether maybe their weight gain hasn't been good, you haven't felt your milk transitioning in, your breasts getting really full and hot and heavy after birth. I like to see that and the change in nappies around kind of day 3 or day 4 after birth to that nice kind of yellow korma colour. That's when we know our milk has transitioned in from the sticky golden colostrum to the more mature milk. Or maybe your baby's weight gain hasn't been sufficient enough. So if you're worried about any of those things, I would always say touch base with a lactation consultant. We are the experts in infant feeding. So whether you are exclusively breastfeeding, whether you are pumping, whether you are combination feeding, and you're unsure about what your baby is taking in, touching base with your local lactation consultant is a great place to start. And one of the big things and the caveats that I want to have for this video is, because I've seen so many other videos out there giving you tips on what you should be eating or drinking or doing in order to boost your milk supply. And actually the biggest thing is to look at your history. So as a lactation consultant, I take a really detailed medical history. We're looking at outruling things that might be a red flag in terms of your ability to make enough milk for your baby. So some of the things that we would be looking for would be some of your hormone levels. So sometimes I would request certain lab results. We're looking at how your cycles have been, both in that trying to conceive period and then how your bleeding is post delivery. So we're looking at whether your placenta has come away and is complete. We're looking at things like PCOS, so you've had previous cysts that have been maybe are present or have been removed. If you've had heavy and painful periods, I like to look at things like insulin resistance. I like to do a full physical exam to make sure that you have sufficient glandular tissue. So you have glandular tissue, or that milk making tissue, in 4 quadrants around your breast. And sometimes if we're missing 1 or 2 of those quadrants, or there is not enough of that almost broccoli-like consistency going around, it can mean then that we go on to not make quite enough milk for our babies. So IGT, insufficient glandular tissue, is probably the primary reason that I see for low milk supply. Along with that, we can have issues with insulin resistance. We can also have issues regarding thyroid function, so that can be hyper or hypo, and other things then of course that can come into play, like tongue tie, then milk supply issues. Maybe our baby's not removing the milk well enough. Our baby who is at the breast has to be able to cup the breast with their tongue and move in a wave-like motion, and if there's some restriction there from an anatomical perspective from the baby, that means that they're not going to be able to remove the milk well. So seeing a lactation consultant who is well versed in all of these areas, well versed in milk supply, well versed in the anatomy from a baby's perspective, but also from a lactation and milk making perspective for mama, is really, really important. So that's probably my biggest tip. If you're concerned, reach out to the expert. Okay, and then the next tip is going to be understanding the anatomy of how we make milk. Not from like a really detailed perspective, but just understanding that the more frequently and the more efficiently we have milk removal, so the more empty the breast is, the more milk we make. So it works on a supply and a demand system. So we're talking about if our breasts are very full and they're not being emptied frequently enough, what happens is it sends a message back to our brain that tells our bodies not to make milk at this time. It says, my baby isn't hungry, my baby doesn't need to be fed now, let's slow down on producing milk at this time. So what we want to be doing then to make sure that we are making and sending a really clear message to our bodies is really regular, so frequent milk removal every 2 to 4 hours, and making sure that that milk removal is efficient so that our baby is draining the breast really well. Again, we're coming back to if baby has any structural issues going on, like tongue tie. If there's any restrictions going on, maybe regarding tension or torsion with regards to the way baby was born. Maybe they were a ventouse delivery or forceps delivery. Maybe your baby was engaged in the pelvis for a long period of time prior to delivery. Maybe your baby was a cesarean birth baby, and as a result, those babies can sometimes struggle when it comes to latching on deeply at the breast, because they have to open their mouth really wide and get a good big mouthful of breast tissue before they do any of the work with their chin, their jaw, and their tongue. So remember that an empty breast makes more milk. try not to space out your feeds if you can. I always say in those really early days where we have almost like a window of 2 weeks to switch on all of the fairy lights along the string of fairy lights to wake up our prolactin receptors to make more milk, that every time your baby wakes, every time they mooch, every time they open their eyes a little bit, offer them the breast. So my next tip then is a really easy one to do, and you can start this from right now, and that is to strip down you both and go skin to skin with your baby. If it's a bit colder, like it's really cold where we are at the moment, I'm wearing my cozy jumper, you would want to be getting into bed or lying down on the sofa and throwing a nice cozy blanket over the both of you. But the good thing about skin to skin is it's not just lovely for cuddles. Skin to skin releases hormones both in you and in baby to encourage you and your milk supply to become more abundant. So what happens is not only do we get this abundant supply of milk, but it encourages baby to be more likely to go to the breast. As well as that, skin to skin truly is magic. It can have a result on balancing your baby's blood sugar levels, helping them to regulate their temperature, and can also increase the likelihood of you having that lovely bond with your baby. So strip down, skin to skin. Your baby doesn't need anything to help them stay cozy except for you and your body. Next tip, I've actually brought my little baby here with me, and that is going to be breast compressions. And what breast compressions do when they are done effectively is they give baby almost like a top up at the breast. So our babies are flow responsive, and when our babies are nursing away at the breast, when the flow of milk slows down, which it does naturally, and once a letdown has finished up, where we have between 2 and 3 letdowns per breast per feed, and the first one comes the easiest, but then our baby has to nurse away to stimulate another one. And in between that time, sometimes our babies will fall asleep, and sometimes they are misquoted as lazy babies. In fact, no baby is lazy. They are flow responsive. So what you can do in knowing that is help the flow of milk move forward. And you're giving your baby a reminder, a prompt to continue to nurse actively at the breast. You're also giving them almost like a top up of milk at the breast. So what this would look like is you latch your baby on deeply. So you're thinking chin to the breast, nipple up the nose, on they go onto the breast. And as they're latching away, they're feeding away, got baby hugging the breast here, you'll hear out for their swallows. The minute those swallowing sounds, that little soft ka sound, slows down, that's where you get your hands involved. So C shape with your thumb and your index finger sandwiching the breast, coming back behind their latch so you're not interfering with their latch. And it can be wherever you have access to. So it could be here, on the top, in underneath, grabbing a big handful of breast tissue. And what you're doing is you're holding down and maintaining compression, like so, until you start to hear them swallowing again. So that is a breast compression, and what will normally happen with that flow of milk moving forward is baby will start to actively suckle at the breast again, and you will start to hear those swallows to pumping output. And if you are struggling to get enough milk overall, this could be relevant to you because you might want to be doing a wee bit of pumping, particularly if your lactation consultant has recommended it. You can see a common theme here. But the big thing is making sure that the pump is appropriate for you. So if you're looking at increasing your pumping output, you want to make sure that the pump is an electric pump, that it's a hospital grade pump, so it's made for that purpose, and that it is a double pump, meaning it pumps from both breasts. That is highly important. The next thing then that we want to be looking at is the pump parts. So are the ductbills and the membranes, have they been replaced frequently? If you're pumping quite a lot, you should be replacing them every 3 months. So for instance, if you're now going back to work, you might want to get a new set of those before you head back. And then the next thing, of course, is making sure that it's the right size and the right fit. So the flange, which is the part that goes over your breast, should fit you appropriately so that it's drawing in the nipple and only a tiny bit of the areola. It should be comfortable for you and it should be getting good output. So looking at all of those things in conjunction with how frequently you are pumping, which should be every 2 to 4 hours in 24 hours, is the big key here. The next thing then with regards to pumping, particularly if you've gone back to work, is we need to think about our hormones. And we need to trick our body to release milk because our bodies are clever. Our body knows the difference between a pump and a baby. So we want to be thinking of all of the things that we maybe would have used in our nice labour environment when we're meeting our baby first. So you're thinking warmth. What makes you feel comfortable? You're thinking maybe a warm compress. You're thinking maybe some gentle massage to wake the breast up, a little bit of nipple tweaking. You're thinking the things then that remind you of your baby. So you might want to bring something there blanky that smells of them. You might have a little video on your phone of them having a cry. That might be enough for you to let down your milk. The idea is we're tricking our bodies into releasing the milk. And working along that same vein, oxytocin, which is of course the big hormone that drives that milk release, is released when we are happy, we are feeling safe, and we are feeling content. So things that make us feel that way. It might be tricking our body into relaxing if maybe you're pumping in an office room somewhere. By listening to a guided meditation, it might be a case of just putting in your headphones and listening to something to just tune out the world for a little bit. And that's enough to simply trick your body into feeling safe and relaxed, so that then your body will go ahead and release what milk is available. So all of those are tips that can be applied if you are doing a wee bit of pumping. And if you're trying to increase your supply alongside the pumping that you're already doing, I would recommend you try out power pumping. Power pumping is one of my favorite tips because it's something that doesn't necessarily have to be done all of the time. And in fact, I find that 3 days in a row of consecutive power pumping is enough. This is where we're doing pumping for 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off for an entire hour. In those 10 minutes on, you were doing your hands-on compressions, just in the same way that you were in that previous tip. And on your 10 minutes off, you were doing some gentle massage to wake up the breast. You might find that some warmth before you pump and a little bit of coconut oil on the inside of your flanges can give a little bit more lubrication so that you can get the maximum amount from this power pumping session. But the idea with power pumping is what we're mimicking is our baby cluster feeding at the breast. So same as on that night 2 when they're suckling like mad to get their milk to transition in, the power pumping mimics that. So it's mimicking your baby going on and off and on and off the breast. And what your baby would be doing in that scenario is making that phone call the same way you do on a Friday night for your pizza delivery, for the milk to transition in and for you to get more milk. So it's saying, hey body, my demands have increased here. I'd like a little bit more milk now. And your body gets that message and then goes ahead to make much more milk for your baby. I hope you found these tips helpful. Some of them are really obvious, some of them are maybe not so obvious. Before going ahead and trying any galactagogues, herbs or supplements, I always recommend touching base with a lactation consultant, and oftentimes they will request that you have blood work done because things like fennel or fenugreek and indeed medications like domperidone can be counterproductive and counterintuitive if you have certain history and medical conditions, and actually result in a decrease in milk supply. So make sure and keep following me for more tips like this, and do touch base with me if you're looking for a one-to-one lactation consult, and I would be delighted to support you. And I'm sending you all of the lovely milky vibes today, and I'll see you in the next video.